MicroBrewr Podcast, Session 15. Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. We talk about everything craft beer related, and we really want to focus on people who are looking at starting up their own microbreweries or want to take their existing breweries to the next level. My name is Nathan Pierce, and I am your host. This is a weekly podcast interviewing brewers and brewery owners, going deep to get inside the industry and inside the heads of people who work there. Each podcast is about 30 minutes in length, and we have show notes and other content at microbrewer.com. That's microbrewer.com. So be sure to look around on the website, check out the show notes, and leave a comment for this episode. I'd really appreciate that. So thank you so much for doing that. I have a question for you. If you could ask just one question to every brewer or brewery owner, what would you ask? After you listen to this episode, go to the show notes page. In the comment section at the bottom, tell me what you would ask. The show notes are at microbrewer.com/session15. In this episode, I talk with Randal Denver from Yards Brewing Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. While working at a winery several years ago, one of Randal's coworkers got him into homebrewing, and he got hooked. So he applied for a job in the packaging line at Yards Brewing Company, and he worked his way up to brewer. So he's got some cool tips on how to go from home brewing to professional brewing. Here's the interview. Okay, Randal, I introduced you to the audience. Can you please take just a couple of minutes and let us know more about you and where you work?
Hi, my name is Randal Denver. I work at Yards Brewing Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
So tell us about Yards Brewing Company.
Yards Brewing Company was founded in 1994 by Tom Kehoe. We brew mostly session beers. We brew drinkable beer. That's our goal. Our goal is to provide a light but yet full-bodied beer that you can drink 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them and, cut the grass or go to a baseball game or cookout, that kind of thing.
I was looking through the catalog on your website before we started this call, and you have a lot of different kinds of beers, and some of them, I was surprised to hear you say session beers because some of them are pretty high ABV, which I actually have a question from one of our listeners later. So tell me a little bit more about just sort of the gamut of your product line. To me, it kind of looked like, I don't know, maybe it's purely like a label looking thing. I didn't get too much into the description of the beers, but it looks like you're focusing on English styles or even early American with your, I think you have is one of your series called Revolution.
Yeah, that's our ales of Revolution, and those are all brewed based on recipes from George Washington, Ben Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson.
That's pretty interesting. I'd like to hear more about that, especially because it seems like there's kind of a trend. Maybe you guys have been doing it for a while, but lately I've been hearing more about beers of history, taking really ancient recipes and making them modern.
Yeah, I think Dogfish started doing that a few years ago. But since we were in Philadelphia, I mean, that's the cradle of the national history. So we do the Tavern Spruce is probably one of my favorite fall beers to drink, and that's based on a recipe by Ben Franklin. And actually, we do spruce tips in the boil, and that's because hops weren't readily available to him at the time, so he threw spruce tips into his brew.
Wow, like tips of tree branches.
Yeah. We brew it all year round, but after our Christmas party, after the Christmas season, when our Christmas tree is taken down, we actually clip the tips off of our Christmas tree and throw it into our brew for that one.
Nice, fresh pine scent.
Yeah, it's my favorite. I mean, I'm biased because I work there, but I mean, there is nothing better than a tavern spruce at Thanksgiving dinner to me.
Nice. Do you keep some of those for year-round enjoyment?
Yeah. I mean, it's a beer. It's an approachable beer, but I mean, it doesn't always. It's a very full-bodied beer, so it's not really drinking while you're cutting the grass kind of beer. But yeah, I do enjoy a few year-round.
Go to the session beers when you're cutting grass.
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the community where Yards Brewing is, or maybe like it seems like you guys distribute pretty widely. Maybe community isn't as much of a focus.
Community is a focus in Philadelphia. I mean, there's a lot of us, from the big guys like Victory and Trogs to Notting Head, the Chamonix Creek. Those guys are kind of blowing up right now. But anytime we do an event once a year called Real Ale, which is all cask conditioned beer, and we always invite local breweries to bring casks of or firkins of their beer to our breweries to have a big event. So I mean, it's kind of, Philadelphia has a very East Coast mentality, but it's kind of us against the West Coast. So yeah. But
so
we
for
definitely
someone on the West Coast, tell me, what does the East Coast mentality mean?
The East Coast mentality is very our way. We do things our way. We'll take a West Coast beer and kind of tone down some of those hops and give it more of a body, a bigger body. But it's definitely, we're not as very laid back as you guys out there.
So do you have a location where your patrons or customers can come and enjoy your beer on site, a restaurant or something like that?
Yeah, we have a tasting room. We call it a tasting room. It's ever growing. We have a full bar and a kitchen that seems to be the menu's rapidly expanding in there too. So it's right in the downstairs downstairs to me, but yeah, right at the brewery.
Yards has been around since 1994, right?
Correct.
Do you know how long the restaurant has been there, or the tap room?
They've always had. It predates me, but when they moved in the current location, that's when I believe they opened the tasting room.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about your focus. What's your position there? Tell me more about that.
Currently, I am one of two overnight brewers.
So you got the night shift.
I got the night shift, so I'm the guy and one of the guys keeping everything going while everyone's sleeping.
You guys are making beer here 24/7.
5 days a week, but yeah, 24 hours a day.
24/5.
24/5. Yeah.
Okay. Let the yeast do the work on Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so it's like middle of the day. I'm totally keeping you up in the middle of the night for you to do this interview. Thanks for staying up.
It's no problem at all.
Okay, I like to go real deep. Tell me about the biggest mistake you ever made as a brewer.
Well, I don't have a mistake as a brewer yet. I'd say that, so I don't ultimately make a huge mistake. But everyone at Yards, including sales and bartenders, anyone who does a tour or tour guides or anybody, they have to put some time in on the packaging line. And the mistake I made there, that we had a new filter that we were installing, and we weren't quite sure flow rate or what we were doing with it quite yet. And when I brought beer into it, the gaskets on the bottom kind of blew out and sent 32-degree beer all over me and everyone around me.
Oh, wow.
And it was quite a mess and very cold and not a fun time.
Sounds like strange brew.
Yeah. It wasn't wasn't too fun. That was kind of in the beginning of my shift, so I spent the rest of the day soaked in cold beer.
Oh my God, yeah, 32 degrees doesn't sound too fun, but beer all over the place does.
No, because then you have to clean it, and it may have looked fun, or I mean, we had a good time with it, but yeah, I pretty much sent beer all over everything, our tools, the floor, the line, open bottles. It was kind of a mess.
Sticky and messy and gross.
Sticky and messy and gross and cold.
Your boss is totally pissed at you.
No. I mean, we have the mentality where, mistakes happen and move on. Just don't do it again.
Awesome. That's pretty cool to work at a place like that. So how much beer was lost?
Not too much. I mean, maybe 5 gallons. It was just what was in the filter itself.
Okay, so it wasn't like a whole vat or anything like that. 30.
No, if it was a whole bright tank, I don't think we'd be having any sort of conversation at all right now.
Okay, so before I get to the next question, give us a little bit of context. Like, tell me about how you got to where you're at in your position now. Just like your history with beer making and whatnot.
Sure. My history with beer making actually starts in a winery. Back in 2011, I believe, 2010, I was working at a winery part-time, just as something new and interesting to do. I was working as an environmental scientist at the time, and that was just a nightmare. So I took a job part-time in the vineyard / winery, and the guy I worked with, he was a homebrewer, and he got me into homebrewing, and then it was kind of the first thing that I'd ever really found that I was good at, and it was relatively easy to get into. So from there, I homebrewed and continued to work at the winery, and just kind of through podcasts and reading and pretty much every piece of educational material I get my hands on, just kind of went from extract to all grain and building a new brew system, and then from there, I was doing a brewery tour of, I went Victory, Trogs, and Yards in the same day. And at Yards seemed very approachable, and everyone seemed very friendly there, so I just figured I would just ask for a card and put in my resume, and a few months went by, and they gave me a call, and I started in the packaging line, like I said, as everyone has to do. And then, about a year later, a position opened up in the brew house, and I applied for that, and here we are.
So you started homebrewing in like 2011, 2012 or something?
Yeah, not that long ago, no.
You're still doing it?
I don't have as much time because of the overnights, but yeah, I'm in the middle of making a half barrel system right now.
Nice. Okay, so you've been doing it for a little while on your own. You've been in the business for a little while. If you could start your career over again in the beer industry, what would you do differently to do it better?
I think I would have gone straight to all grain and not wasted time with extract, and maybe started. Well, I mean, there's no possible way to know, what your career path is when you're, 20, 22 years old. But getting into it as early, if you like beer and you think you can do it, getting into it as early as possible and as often as possible. That's what I would do differently.
Nice. Thanks for the advice. So is it too soon? Do you have a moment when you realized you finally succeeded, or are you still looking forward to that moment? Do you have like a threshold when you know that you're going to succeed, or have you met it already?
As far as personal goals, the day I mashed in on a 50 barrel system, I think that was the day where I realized that I was not that long ago dumping cans of extract onto a 5-gallon pot on my stove, and now I'm mashing in thousands of pounds of grain on a 50 barrel system.
Every day.
Every day, yeah.
Step in the door at work.
Yeah, every time. I mean, as a home brewer, every time I cross that threshold, that's succeeding to me.
Great. Congratulations on having the job of your dreams.
Thank you.
So what's been like a favorite event or a favorite memory since entering the world of beer?
For me, it was the first time. I worked a few events, festivals outside of the brewery, but the first time I poured beer as a brewer. So just to see it go from hot water and grain to me pouring it to a patron across the table, that was a pretty interesting moment in my life to realize that I went from, and I still am the person on the other side of the table, but to be the guy who actually brewed that and in the past put it in a bottle or keg and now pouring it for a customer.
That's a pretty neat experience. I'll bet that's a pretty special feeling that you had. Take us there. Tell us about the event. Tell us about the customer. Do you remember? Tell us the details.
Let's see. I think it was an event called Evening with the Masters. I live in Delaware, so I commute every day to Philly. So it was an event down here in Delaware, and it was I believe the beer was Philly Pale or Brawler, one of the two. But the first time, the first people walked in, and that was, just pouring it into their sample glass and them taking a sip and saying it was great and thanks. That's pretty paramount for someone who was, like I said, a home brewer 2 years ago.
Did you just kind of keep that special moment for yourself, or did you tell them I made that?
It was an internal moment. I'm not very forthcoming with information because you never know the kind of people you're going to get on the other side of the table, especially the time of the day of the event.
Nice. That's pretty cool. So what advice could you give an aspiring home brewer? What's the most important thing for someone starting a brewery or starting a career, wanting to maybe take a path that you've taken from home brewing to brewer? What can they start doing tomorrow?
Education. And I'm not saying that you have to go out and do Siebel or anything. If you have the financial means for that, go for it. But just like any kind of college, so to speak, when you're done, you just have a piece of paper. So read as much as you can, listen to any podcast you can, and most of all, brew. Brew as often and as many different styles as you can. And because the more hands-on you are, the more you'll have a better feeling for your equipment and the process, and and it's continued to grow. Whether you start with extract or brew in a bag, or every few months take the next step up. Whether it's temperature control during fermentation, or a bigger system, or a conical fermenter, or building something, or experimenting with hops. It was the best thing I can say is just to do it over and over again, and really submerge yourself into not just brewing but the industry as a whole. Know what beers are coming out by who and when and where, and go to breweries, go to tours, take as many tours as you can, see different layouts of breweries and how they're doing it and why they're doing it.
Immersion, soak it all in, take in as much as you can. Okay, now we have a question from one of our listeners, Josh Pierce, who asks, do you think alcohol levels will start to come down anytime soon?
No, I don't. If anything, they're going to go. They're already going up. A session beer 2 or 3 years ago was 3-4% as far as alcohol. And ours, for example, our pale ale is 4.5. You see the average IPA is around 6-7. I don't think it's ever it's never going to come down. And like I said, it's going to go up because you have two kinds of beer drinkers. I think you have people who like craft beer and they want to drink 2 or 3 and enjoy different kinds. But then you have the bang for your buck drinkers who are going to spend, if they're going to spend $10, $12, $15 on a 6-pack, they want the highest ABV possible. So I don't think it's going to come down. It's going to go up.
You mentioned the session beers, and I also saw on your website, you guys, Yards Brewing has some pretty high ABV beers too. The Thomas Jefferson Tavern Ale is 8%. Cape of Good Hope is 9%, and your 750 series has like a few beers that are over 9%. Old Bartholomew, your barley ale line's 10.3%.
Yeah. I mean, I unfortunately I view those as session beers. Maybe that's my personal drinking behavior, but
Wow. Throw back a couple old Bartholomews.
Yeah. I think we're on par with the industry. I mean, we don't, we have a wide variety. I mean, to me personally, I don't think an 8% beer is that much. I mean, because you're only well, if you're responsible, you're only going to drink one or two. But the way I go out and try beer is not a pint. I do the tasters, samples. I don't investigate craft beer to get drunk. I'm out there to try something new. So I think if a 4-ounce pour of an 8-ounce beer or an 8% beer isn't obscene to me.
Yeah, just last night I was at Discretion Brewing in SoCal, California. I was over on the other side of Monterey Bay, and I had a business meeting, like to call it a business meeting. And first thing I asked for, they could do a tasting flight. I think they're 4-ounce pours, and I said they do them 6 at a time. And I said, give me 6 of your most popular beers. That's actually what I ask for most of the time that I go there, just because I like to try a range of beers. And I don't necessarily go in order either. I might go back and forth to kind of really study them and compare the differences between the different styles to expand my palate and really sort of understand beer and broaden my horizons and get to know it better.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I do it as well. That's how I think most craft beer drinkers should approach it. I mean, there are days after a day of work or, lawn work or something where I come home and drink a couple of pints of something, but that's something I'm familiar with and not trying out something new. I mean, we're very popular, the mix 6-packs. I'll make a mix 6-pack for like a Sunday dinner or something. But that's split over 2 or 3 people. And I mean, the byproduct of a craft beer fan is a little buzz or being drunk, but that's not what I shoot for.
Fringe benefit.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, the other night I went to a friend's house. I called him up kind of last minute, and he said he was making dinner, and he didn't really have any beer. He just had Pabst Blue Ribbon, which is like nothing against Pabst Blue Ribbon. He likes it a lot, but that was the only one that he had. So I was like, well, I'll stop by the store and I'll pick up some too. And they just had a great selection. It was hard to decide. So I brought a few different kinds, like a 6-pack and a couple of 4-packs. And I told him, okay, don't get excited. I don't want to be drinking a ton of beer, but I do want to try all 3 of these. So you're going to split each one of them with me. And he thought that was cool too. So I didn't get smashed from trying, one of those was Dogfish Head's Midas Touch. And as I was taking a sip of it, I realized it's like 9%. So if I would have had 3 beers on my own, I wouldn't have been able to drive home that night.
Right. I mean, it's about education and being smart about it. I mean, I prefer, small portions, more small. I mean, granted, it all ends up kind of the same way anyway. But trying a few small, a few short pours is ideal for me.
Yeah, me too. So, Randall, now it's time for happy hour. The next set of questions, they're a little bit lighter. We're gonna go. We're gonna get to know each other a little bit better and have some fun and get inside the industry. Are you ready?
Sure.
Cans or bottles?
I gotta say cans.
Why is that?
I think that's the future of the industry, and as far as it's cheaper to transport, and you don't have to worry about light penetration in a glass bottle. If you want to go camping or fishing or tailgating, I think cans are easier to transport and more allowed typically. But I think as far as overall product longevity, I think cans are the way to go. You see more and more breweries doing cans too.
There are more and more breweries switching over to cans. What's the most challenging beer you've ever made?
Well, I professionally it'd be the Thomas Jefferson. There's just a ton of specialty malt, especially grains in there that require a lot of milling and into the boil or into the ton. But at home, I would have to say I brewed a beer for Christmas this year that was based on my wife's grandfather's cookie recipe, and I did 2 different batches. One with actual cookies. I had my sister-in-law make the cookies, and I put them in the mash. And then one was ultimately the smarter way to go, was just to use the raw ingredients into the mash.
So how did it turn out? Didn't turn out so well with the cookies in there?
They both tasted great. It was just cookies in the mash really just clogged up everything, and it just. And I had carb problems later on because of the lipids in the butter, kind of clinging to the CO2 bubbles. But yeah, don't put cookies in your mash, I would say.
Gross. So when you did it the other way with just the ingredients, did you include all of the ingredients, or did you leave out the butter and some other things?
I left out the butter, and that was more of a like a roasty, toasty version of it. I mean, the one with the cookies tasted like straight up cookies, which is what I was going for. But it was just a nightmare to actually do.
Well, I was surprised to hear that answer. You know, cookie dough ice cream is super popular. You might be onto something in beer.
Yeah, if I can figure out a way to do it properly, I definitely would try it again. It was more of a fall winter beer, so I might give it a shot again this year.
Cookie dough beer.
Cookie dough beer.
Tell me one beer style that you think will be gaining more attention.
We can already see it now with they're calling it a session IPA. They're doing a lower ABV, and they're up in the IBUs. So I think that it's going to be a continuing trend. Is the session IPA.
Okay, if you were going to make a 5-gallon batch at home this weekend, what kind of beer would you make?
I would do a Pilsner, and I like to do all kinds of interesting stuff, so I would probably do a blueberry Pilsner, probably.
Nice. I'd like to try it.
Yeah, I would do... I've done it before, where I pretty much just buy a box of blueberry tea and throw it in at the end of boil.
Can you suggest a book for our audience that will help them succeed in a career in the beer industry?
Yeah, if you're looking to start your own brewery, it would be definitely Brewing Up a Business by Sam Calagione. And then educational-wise, anything by Jamil Zainasheff or John Palmer. They have the Water Book, Brewing Classic Styles. And then the IPA book, Mitch Steele from Stone. That's a good read too. It's just on the IPA.
Give us one last piece of advice for someone who just brewed the first batch at their new brewery, and then we'll close up the brew house for the night.
Clean and sanitize. That's my advice to anyone, homebrewer, winemaker, anybody. Clean and sanitize.
Well, Randal, I've had a great time chatting with you. Thanks for your help and insights into working at a successful brewery. Tell us how we can stay in touch with you, and then we'll set this episode aside to ferment. Sure,
yeah. If you're in Philly around 3 a.m, you can swing by the back door and I'll say hi. But pretty much the Yard's tasting room. I'm in there from time to time, but right now I'm a graveyard guy. So yeah, back door at 3 a.m.
I want to thank Randal Denver again for being on MicroBrewr Podcast. I really appreciate you for taking the time out after your night shift to be on the podcast. And listeners, thanks for being here too. Please check out Yard's Brewing Company and let them know that you appreciated Randal sharing his information and advice on working as a brewer. You can find links to get in touch with Randal and Yard's Brewing Company and the other great resources we talked about in this episode. The show notes for this episode are at microbrewer.com/session15. And remember the question I asked you in the beginning. If you could ask just one question to every brewer or brewery owner, what would you ask? Please go to the show notes for this episode now, microbrewer.com/session15, and in the comments section at the bottom, tell me what you would ask. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, support your local brewery, and we will see you next week.